Yes, friends. On a Tuesday, I am Adam Warnbreck. This is OGP, the One Giant podcast. We're, of course, covering the New York Football Giants and also hosting on the Locked On Nets podcast, covering your Brooklyn Nets. Flying solo today as we finally get ourselves through week number 2. We look ahead here now to the week 3 matchup, obviously, with the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to save our predictions and some of the things that we're going to be looking for until later in the week when Andy will be back on with me. But I wanted to go through a couple of different things here today. The idea of what we maybe can learn now through 2 weeks of the NFL season, some takeaways for the New York Football Giants, and then obviously some things to update just when we talk about the New York Football Giants, some of the players we've been without over the last handful of weeks, certainly from the preseason and then bleeding over into the regular season, and what it means big picture. But let's start just with, I think, give some context to the New York Football Giants and then just to the league in general. When we look back at what we learned from week 2 in the NFL, obviously the Giants lost on Thursday night in devastating fashion on the last second field goal. But when we look around the league, it's just interesting to think about, right? You come off that obviously Thursday night loss, kicking things off in week number 2 for the New York Giants. But then on Sunday, what are things that we learned when the Patriots beat the Jets 25-6, right? This is the Patriots getting back on track there after losing a close one, disappointing one with a fumble there at the end of week 1. But the Jets are going to struggle. Rookie quarterbacks are going to struggle in this league. Zach Wilson just lobbing them up left, right, and center. And the Patriots are going to find a way to be a steady football team. The Broncos, who beat the Jacksonville Jaguars maybe played a little more respectable in that game. But combined with playing the Giants, by the way, the Broncos are one of those 2-0 teams that's going to need to feel their way through this without Jerry Jeudy. But it's good to stack up those W's when you can early and often. Yet Buffalo bouncing back, even though, interestingly enough, the completion percentage, the accuracy for one Josh Allen, I have him in fantasy. He's not doing me any favors there necessarily. I actually made the mistake of this past week on a fantasy side note. I have Justin Herbert. I also have Josh Allen on my team. It's a 2 QB league, so super flex league there. Started both of them, had Daniel Jones and Teddy Bridgewater on my bench. Should have inserted them. Not often you're going to hear in fantasy that Daniel Jones and Teddy Bridgewater would have been the better options over Allen and Justin Herbert, but that was the case. But the things that we really take away when you look at some of these games, Eagles are going to struggle against good defenses. San Francisco still finds their way to 2-0, which is all that matters early in the year. Maybe the Raiders, who the Giants are going to see later in the season, maybe that's one of the teams now. You talk about those games as being, what are the ones you think the Giants could win? And I said last week that I'm still confident in this New York Football Giants team based on what I saw on the offensive side of the ball in that week 2 loss to the Washington football team. But the Raiders were one of those games. And you look at it and you go, all right, well, their defense hasn't been good. They wasted a lot of draft picks, etc. What's Derek Carr really as a quarterback? He's looked pretty strong these first couple of weeks in the NFL season. So certainly that becomes a little bit more difficult of a matchup. But I think the reality here that I took away from the first 2 weeks of the season and why you really wish that the Giants could have pulled out that win on Thursday night, it's kind of that Bill Belichick mentality of the first few weeks of the season are still a process. It's still refining who's in what roles, how are we running our schemes, what plays are working, what adjustments do we need to make. The problem is when you drop those first couple of games, you know that you're now fighting an uphill battle the rest of the way because you need to find a way to make those up. The better teams, for example, great game between the Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Well, the Chiefs aren't overly concerned about dropping that game. They lost by a point on a 4th down run from Lamar Jackson. You'll live with that. There's some turnovers in that game, things to clean up, as to use a little bit of coach speak there. But you're okay with what you saw there. And you're also not in your mind right now when you look at that division and you see that you're at the bottom half of it with the way the Raiders and the Broncos play. You're not concerned about it. The long-term goal, where you want to be at the end of the season, that's what really matters. So it's just interesting to think about it from that perspective because a lot of teams that you might have been a lot higher on coming out of week 1, certainly you feel differently about. And last night, no exception to this rule, I think that the Green Bay Packers bounced back. It helps that they played against the Detroit Lions. It helped that that game got wet on the back end of it because they were going back and forth a little bit. You get the fumbled snap from Goff. You get the bad throw from him on the interception. So there's a lot of things that I think kind of unraveled there. And even the Detroit piece of it, 0-2 now, right? And it's the kind of thing where they had a chance in week one. They come up short. Maybe last night could have gone a little bit differently. Now they're 0-2, and it just feels like a young team with a lot of young players. This is going to be that learning curve. And all of a sudden you go from saying, boy, maybe we can really get something done here to now having to kind of look at it, I think, and say, or maybe it's going to be a more difficult battle than we realized. And for sake of argument, when we take a look at that Detroit Lions football team and where they're going to go from here, you're going to end up with, and this is why it matters for the Giants too, right? You play the Atlanta Falcons, but then you get the Saints, then you get the Dallas Cowboys for a second divisional game. But you have to think about where you can get your wins over the course of a season, and they're going to come up here. Taking a look, that loss. Now they'll play the Ravens. Then they'll get back-to-back divisional games against the Bears and the Vikings, and then the Cincinnati Bengals. For a team that has a weak defense, Minnesota, for whatever they are, also winless. They're going to be able to throw the ball around. They've got a lot of weapons there for Kirk Cousins, likewise for Cincinnati. And then you fall into the Rams and then into an NFC East opponent in the Eagles. So who knows where it's going to go, but when you could have stole one of those games early in the season, it makes you think back on it. And obviously that ties back into the New York Football Giants and what we hope they could have done. But I'm still bullish on them. I still believe, I've come very close to saying I think that the Giants are going to be 2-3 through 5 games. So that would mean obviously taking the Atlanta Falcons game and then splitting those 2 games between the Saints and the Cowboys. And obviously, if you could, you'd want to take that divisional game off of Dallas. But I think they can get there. My belief has to be that the offense is showing you that it's good enough, and the defense is going to prove that they're not that bad. It cannot be the case. At least I hope it can't be the case. That's the silver lining that I'm really leaning into here, because I don't think you can have that much talent on the defensive side of the ball and find yourself playing these shell defenses coming up short. And Patrick Graham, he showed us too much as a defensive coach last year, the ability to utilize different personnel in different situations to impact the game in spite of not having the highest level of talent. You've brought in some extra bodies into that group. I think he's going to prove it. And then we also know we're going to get some reinforcements with the rookie Aaron Robinson at some point, as well as maybe Ellerson Smith down the line. So it's just got to be a patience play here, I think. On that end, as we turn our attention fully into the New York Football Giants, Evan Ingram upgraded, I should say, to questionable from week 2 to week 3. This plays into that narrative that the Giants could have put him on the 3-week IR. Instead, they kept him on the active roster. And you would think, because they felt pretty confident that he was going to be able to make his way back for a week 3 game, which allows them to now utilize him. If he had to be all the way through 3 weeks, then you'd be looking at a week 4 at the earliest for his return. Not necessarily something that you can afford to do, especially when you see how the first 2 weeks went for them. Him getting back out there is important. I don't know what the status of Kyle Rudolph is as far as how healthy is he really, but he's looked like a shell of himself, had a nice catch in week 2 and looked certainly better to whatever degree you want to put that in. But he looked better in week 2 than week 1, so maybe he's building up to it. There's nobody else on the roster that's as dynamic as Evan Ingram, and at the very least, there's nobody else at the tight end position that's going to garner the focus of the defense, where you're going to open up maybe some even more favorable matchups on the outside, maybe some opportunities for Saquon out of the backfield, and continued success for the wide receiver like Sterling Shepard, who's had an absolutely phenomenal start to his year. The other piece that we got this week too, and I want to get into a couple of quotes here. It's Matt Peart. During the week here, he's been getting used at a couple of different spots, gotten some tackle reps as you would expect, but also been worked out at the guard. So the first and foremost is that feels pretty obvious given the fact that Nick Gates was moved to guard and then suffered that terrible leg fracture injury. He was up and walking in the hospital, I think the same day as the surgery. So, I mean, the dude is an absolute machine. We hope that he can make it back at some point. They're not ruling out coming back this year, but I think at some point we'll hear that information. Especially if you think about as they move along and the Giants maybe say, do we need to make another move? Do we need to adjust this roster? You may just have to do something and say, we'll see you next season and we'll see what the state of your health is. But from that standpoint, now you think about, you had Bretterson come in there to fill in for Nick Gates last week. Price use the metrics that we use. Pro Football Focus, he did not grade out well in that game. So that could be a potential just point of struggle going forward. Don't know what the other options would be or what the Giants may try to do there. But Pert's going to have to fall into that category of when you look at all the players on this roster, when you think about the depth at different positions, he has to be, as a third round pick in his second year, even though he lost his starting job to Nate Solder on the right side, he's still one of the more talented players on the team at those positions. So he's going to have to be utilized in different places potentially, at the very least, as a depth piece, should something happen. So by getting him some of these reps, remember, Brenderson suffered a mild injury when he first came over and joined the Giants. So what if he goes down? Who's going to step in there? You want to at least feel like Pert has some familiarity at these other positions before he dives in. We'll take a look here at the quote that came across from Joe Judge when he was asked about it. And just to then we take away whatever we think we can from this when talking about what the potential is for him to get utilized. That is Matt Peart at different positions. So as we say, we're going to rotate Matt on through the tackle position. Judge said we'll kind of take a look at him, maybe playing some stuff inside as we get going right here. We'll kind of work around through practice these next few days and kind of see where things shake out. So Matt has been making gains, he went on to say, for us and doing a good job. I think Andrew Thomas, of course, and Nate Solder are doing a good job right there playing tackle for us. So again, while he says he's going to be working at the tackle position during the week and throwing in some guard work, it's just too one-to-one here to not at least connect some of these dots. And the one thing that I'll say when we think about it, let's go micro macro here. I think we've done this a few times now to start the year. In the micro, it gives you depth at the guard position. Maybe you can rotate him through if he's, better suited in certain schemes or certain situations. Maybe the Giants can go ahead and utilize him against the Atlanta Falcons. And it'll be an opportunity on a week-to-week basis where Atlanta's not going to know what it looks like if Matt Peart were to line up at left guard, or if Matt Peart were to rotate at right guard. Maybe that's easier for him there. And then maybe Hernandez goes back to left guard. Who knows? But these different looks, if you feel like you have confidence in a certain number of plays, hopefully you can catch Atlanta off guard. On the macro level, remember going forward here, do I think that Matt Peart can still be the starting right tackle for the New York Football Giants in the long term? Yes. However, if in the short term, given the injuries that they've had to deal with on the inside, if he can identify a new role for himself at a new position, then maybe in the offseason, the Giants, again, as they go back in and reassess the line, well, can Matt Peart be a starting guard for you going into next year? And then you'll get back into the draft with those multiple first-round picks, multiple picks throughout the draft, and go ahead and get yourself another starting tackle to put into the mix. So it's an opportunity. And then this is 100% silver lining on my part, but that's what you have to do when you're dealing with these injuries and also dealing with a player in Matt Peart that we had higher expectations for coming into the year. He's regressed in some capacity, or at least hasn't taken that next step forward. And we'll wait and see what these results are. And who knows? He has longer arms, so that typically is not something you see at guards. They're a little bit thicker, a little bit tighter in, right? Want to be able to grab and manhandle guys in close to the chest, but who knows, right? If you have confidence in these players in any capacity across the line, you got to try to utilize them, give him every chance to have some success, and maybe identify a new fit for Matt Peart across this line. The other piece that we can touch on here as well is the Kenny Golladay comments. Listen, we talked about it after the game. I was saying at the time it was obviously Andy on with me, and then also Candace Cooper, and I was just saying, like, I didn't care, as I said at the time, I didn't care whether it was at Daniel Jones or at Jason Garrett or at a team, whoever it was. This was, again, just predicated around what did you do well in the game or not. So you get 8 targets, and should Kenny Golladay be the most targeted player in the stat book by the end of the game for the New York Football Giants? Maybe. But we know what it means when you have Kenny Golladay there, what it affords for a player like Sterling Shepard. And when he's having Shepard, that level of success that he has had these first 2 weeks of the season, you want to go back to that well. You want to keep exposing it. We mentioned, I'm fine with the fact that Kenny Golladay and Daniel Jones are going to have to get on the same page, right? They didn't get a lot of time to work together in the offseason. Kenny was dealing with the injury. So by the time he gets back on, these are, again, active reps trying to work yourself in. He caught 3 of 8 balls. He dropped one on a bit of a go route there that bounced off his hands, a little in cut there at the top of the route, bounced off his hands. He knows he should have caught it. He would tell you as much. And then he also had a little comeback curl route that really got in tight on him. Defender was blanketed all over him. But as a number one, you want to catch those. So go catch 5 of 8 and then say, I want 10 targets so I can get 6 or 7 catches, right? I want to make bigger impact plays. Now, maybe Kenny's looking at that deep shot to Darius Slayton and saying, how do we scheme me open for that opportunity? Because I won't drop that ball. All these things are fine. It's all great, but I just want to see the production on the field. When asked about it, to clarify, as we say, we'll go ahead and pull up his quote here, in which, and listen, again, I don't have any issue with being passionate, with being fired up, all those things. So this is actually Daniel Jones speaking about it here. I think he was just frustrated with the situation. Jones told reporters, we're all good. I love Kenny. I thought he played hard and did a lot of good things out there. I've got to do a better job of finding him in some places, and we'll work through it. So, I mean, listen, that's first and foremost, that's your franchise quarterback, we think. Saying the right things, right? I mean, Eli Manning did this entire career. He says, did some good things, some things we like, some things we didn't like, some things to clean up. I got to do a better job putting it in good spots for them, etc. Right? That's your responsibility as the leader of this team. Excuse me. You put it on you and you move past it. And also you say, listen, we feel good about it. It's fine, right? I want to just take a look here if we can get the Golladay, who we're saying was actually confirmed to be screaming at coordinator Jason Garrett. Not so much about me getting more targets. This is Kenny Golladay. Pretty much just me talking to JG a little bit, and that's 2 competitive guys right there. More so just me wanting to do anything I can, not so much give me the ball more, Golladay told reporters. So, again, it's fine. I just want to see the production. I mean, that's all that I care about here. I only care about Kenny Golladay being a more productive receiver for the New York Football Giants. And I'm not saying that he won't be. I said this on the last episode. I think he's going to be great. I think him and Daniel Jones are going to have a ton of success. We know, as we've mentioned, about those deep ball accuracy numbers for Daniel Jones. They're going to figure these things out. The interesting thing to me is just that we talked about the separation issues that these wide receivers dealt with last year. Kenny Golladay is not a big separation guy. Now, he's just an elite wide receiver, so even without separation, he's going to make those catches for you more often than not. But it's not going to be that necessarily one-to-one. You can even look week 2 and think about McLaurin, right? He's not a pure speedster, but he, young player, quick, out of the routes, all those kind of things. I mean, I think Kenny has all those traits as well. But when you see, and this is why it goes hand in hand, right? When you see McLaurin finding space and working in space and giving a big, wide open target for Heineke to throw to, that's what you want to see from Kenny Golladay. And for me, that comes beating your man off the line, generating separation space for yourself, and then allowing your quarterback to find you on the go, get you out there, let you run after the catch so that you can benefit as much as possible from the opportunities you're going to get. I think he's at 7 for 105 right now, if I'm not mistaken, Kenny Golladay. And it's good. It's good, not great. What if I crunch those numbers, right? What would you... 60 or so catches, right? I mean, it wouldn't be the final stat line that we'd be looking for, obviously, but it's all right in the context of this team needs to work and continue to build. By the way, you also have the young rookie in Kadarius Toney saying, no big deal, just lame. That's all that is in terms of not being utilized more. He got 19 snaps in week number 2. I think he got 5 in week number 1. I understand any player wanting to be utilized, but when you miss the offseason, I think a big carryover from last year to this year in terms of how this offense looks at things and what the expectations are, they want to feel like there's the highest possible level of confidence that everyone knows where they need to be on every single play. You want to avoid confusion. You want to avoid mistakes, right? So Kadarius, you just got to keep learning, keep growing. And Joe Judge said as much. They like what he's doing in practice. They like what he's doing in the film room. They like the questions that he's asking. I'm not going to be surprised. 5 snaps week 1, 19 snaps week 2. Atlanta is a perfect opportunity to really utilize Kadarius Toney on a couple of big plays. You saw the ones where a player like CJ Board was used. Here's an opportunity to use Kadarius Toney in those spots and maybe hit some more home runs. So I'm not gonna sweat any of this stuff if I'm being honest. It's just let's get to the next game. Let's see the production, right? You lose on a Thursday. It's the longest gap between your next game, and it's plenty of time for conversations like this to come up and for these questions to be asked, for speculation to arise. Um, Interestingly enough, the Giants, in spite of the loss, I think Bleacher Report had them staying at 28th overall in terms of the power rankings. Another, though, had them rising a little bit, which I thought was pretty impressive. And I think the tie-in that we can take out of that is the questions about this team. I mean, I don't mean now in week 2, seeing what the defense has or has not done, but everything was about Daniel Jones. Like, it's not even about the offensive line. And one of the narratives that came out, I want to give credit over on Twitter if I can remember who it was, coming out of this past weekend of games was talking about mistakes, mitigating them, and what you're willing to tolerate if you're an NFL team in terms of penalties, in terms of turnovers, in terms of setbacks, right? And I ended up pulling a couple of interesting stats up from last year, and it ties into the New York Giants. When you're a really good offensive team, so take the Kansas City Chiefs, they were 4th overall last year in penalties with 105. They were the 4th worst team in the league. They ended up in the Super Bowl and losing to Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Why? Because you have enough talent on that roster that when you take a penalty and you go from a 2nd and 10, 2nd and 8 to a 2nd and 22 because of a false start on the offensive line or because of a holding penalty, that doesn't faze them. You've got Tyreek Hill, you've got Edwards-Helaire, you've got Hardman, right? You have Patrick Mahomes, right? You have Kelsey. Like, you have all of these weapons so that even when you're kind of, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, yeah, we'll take another couple steps forward here. This isn't going to be the end of the world. When you look at that game against the Ravens, Lamar Jackson turned the ball over. I mean, he turned the ball over in week 1 as well. But he's such a talented quarterback. He's so talented with the ball in his hands, right? His ability to escape the pocket, to run, to make defenders miss. The impact that he has kind of puts you into this area where you go, yeah, turnovers, okay. But we win more games than we lose, so it really doesn't matter. And it's a shift, I think, from a perspective around the NFL of, it used to be, and this is still true for certain demographics, but it used to be you want to play clean, error-free football. That's like the number one, right? But now, because of how offensively driven the league is, it's really just about be prolific on offense, right? Be so good on offense that there's really no level of mistake that you're not going to be able to make up for. The teams that still preach about playing error-free football, and everybody does, but again, the bad teams are the ones that preach that, because ahead of the Kansas City Chiefs last year, I think it was definitely the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'll fail to remember a couple other teams that were in that group there, but 5 out of the top 10 teams that had the highest number of penalties were 5 playoff teams. So 50% of the top 10 most penalized teams last season made it to the playoffs. Talent overcomes mistakes. The Giants last year, 81 penalties against, among the fewest in the league. Maybe it probably saved them from going, being a 4-12 team, but they won 6 games. And the reason why you preached so much is because you don't have the talent to overcome the mistakes. So you need to absolutely mitigate and remove them from the equation. Even this past week, right? Against the Washington football team, a clean game for Daniel Jones. That's what gave you the opportunity to have success. The Giants, though, have put the weapons, especially on offense, to have that level of, listen, we will be able to overcome that our defense is giving up 20 points a game if that's what needs to happen, because we think we've put the players in place here to be so good and so explosive offensively that we can put up numbers in a hurry if we need to. The problem right now is going to be that offensive line and giving the time to Daniel Jones, and how much incrementally do we see Jason Garrett continue to open things up, continue to utilize the running game of Daniel Jones, let alone Saquon Barkley, to kind of expose those dual phases. 95 rushing yards last week for Daniel Jones. You have to find a way to scheme those very easy opportunities where the hits few and far between for Daniel Jones, right? He was able to accomplish what he wanted to running the ball without having to worry about taking any big shots. So that's pretty important in that regard as well, and something that I think we'll continue to watch going forward, because when you talk about Daniel Jones and his turnover issues, yes, he needs to cut down on them. That's 100%, right? But if we go ahead and we'll get out the door here on this and just think about what has Lamar Jackson done over the first few years of his career, understanding, by the way, he was an MVP in his very brief career so far in the NFL, right? He's already accomplished a lot in a very short time. But here's a guy that, coming into, as we look over his career, right? He threw, let's hit you with 3 interceptions in 2018. He didn't play, started 7 games that year. But in 2019 and 2020, playing 15 games, missed a game in each year, threw 6 interceptions, threw 9 interceptions. Okay. And gave you 36 and 26 touchdowns, respectively. It's the margin between the errors that you really need to see happen in a bigger way. And if you went into his rushing numbers, I want to get just a quick look at where the fumbles were, right? He had 12 his rookie year, 9 his second season, and 10 last year. So, in those years, when you talk about total turnovers, he gave you 12, 9, 10 over the first 3 years of his career. Combine those with the interceptions that he threw in the passing game, and now all of a sudden, you're talking about a guy that gave you what? 15, 15, and 19? It's a lot of turnovers, but he's great. And if you're good enough, it doesn't matter. And if you give enough weapons, you end up like Kansas City winning the Super Bowl 2 years ago, right? Like, that's just the difference. The concern from a Giants perspective is, are we good enough? Do we have enough of the talent to overcome some of those mistakes? Can we let Daniel Jones loose without worrying that, well, a fumble here or an interception there, and it's going to derail things? This is where, again, comes back into, and we're going to get into this tomorrow on YouTube. We'll get into it Thursday on YouTube. And then for Friday's show, we'll be back in, Andy and myself, talking specifically the Atlanta Falcons game and what we're going to watch there. But I'm going to go through the Pro Football Focus grades from week 1, week 2. We have a rolling tally for all the key players there, and there's some things that certainly are concerning on that front. The snap counts as well, and just thinking about how tight are these margins for the New York Football Giants when it comes to the opportunities for success. I'm going to continue to be bullish on the New York Football Giants turning this thing around. Like I said, I'm very close to committing to the 2-3 record through 5 games. I'm very close to committing to 4-5 through 9 games ahead of that bye. And as I said at the top of the season, 6-7 through 13 games with 4 to go and 3 divisional matchups. That's still very much on the table. So I've been preaching it over on Twitter. Believe it here on the podcast as well. Don't bail out on this team just yet. It is not going to be like last year, a very, very slow start and then a bit of a surge on the back half of the year. I think this team's going to get right in a hurry. As I said, you can follow us on YouTube where we're live streaming also the podcast episodes, as well as additional content covering the New York Football Giants over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, Instagram, all those great places. Follow the podcast wherever you get those needs fulfilled. And if Andy Makowitz were here, he certainly would want the people to know, as always, demanding it, I think is the way the phrase goes. If I had my partner in crime here, let's go Big Blue.